Somewhere in the outer reach of a galaxy that has stopped listening, a planet is still breathing. 11 billion people, gardens, glass that catches morning light and holds it like a secret. A civilization that never built a weapon because it believed for 200 years that a promise was enough. The promise has a name. The promise just broke. Now a single building, sixth floor. One man at a console in the dark, hands flat on equipment. He designed himself, broadcasting into silence that has been broadcasting back for 4 days. Outside, the city is not destroyed. Not yet. That is the part that takes the longest to accept. It is simply waiting. Something is coming across the dark between stars. The civilized worlds have voted. The answer was no. And somewhere on an unregistered frequency, a channel that should not exist, that was never filed, that no one in power knows about, a light is blinking. Part 1, the vote. The alarm stopped at 0340. Not because the danger had passed, not because anyone had come. They stopped because the backup power finally gave out on sublevel 3, and there was no one left who knew how to restart it. Kael knew, but Kael was 6 floors up, and Kael had stopped moving an hour ago. He sat in the signal room with his hands flat on the console, not typing, not adjusting frequencies, just sitting there the way a man sits when he has run out of things to do but cannot bring himself to leave. The room smelled like cooling circuits and something older underneath. Dust, maybe. The kind that settles into walls over decades and never fully leaves. Outside, through the narrow viewport, HFY Prime was dark. Not the gentle dark of a city sleeping, the other kind, the kind that comes after. He picked up his personal recorder, the small one he had carried in his coat pocket for 11 years, the one his daughter had given him when she still thought he would use it to document his retirement travels. He had never documented anything. He had just carried it, the way you carry something from someone you love without quite knowing why. He pressed the button. He said, "My name is Kael. I am the last administrator still transmitting from HFY Prime. I am not a soldier. I have never been a soldier. I am a retired telecommunications engineer who spent 30 years building systems designed so that exactly this situation would never happen." He paused. It happened anyway. 14 days earlier, HFY Prime had been the kind of place that made people stop mid-sentence. You would be explaining something perfectly ordinary to someone, and then the morning light would catch the silk glass in the market district, and you would just stop. Because there are things in the universe that earn silence simply by existing, and HFY Prime was one of them. The silk glass. That was what everyone mentioned first. An architectural material unique to the planet, grown in kilns over 7 generations, by families who kept the process secret, not out of greed, but out of something closer to reverence. It caught light differently at different hours, not like a prism scattering color, more like it was remembering the light from before and showing it to you gently. The markets opened before sunrise. The gardeners came first, moving through the pre-dawn streets with the particular unhurried confidence of people who have risen before the rest of the world their entire lives and feel no need to explain it. Then the glass workers carrying finished pieces wrapped in cloth that seemed too thin to protect anything and always protected everything. Then the silk merchants, the water traders, the children who had no business being up yet, but always were. 11 billion people. That was how many called HFY Prime home. 11 billion people who grew things, made things, traded things, who had never built a warship because they had spent 200 years operating under the reasonable assumption that a promise was a promise. The promise had a name, the Great Compact, a treaty between all the civilized worlds that said simply that no signed world would stand alone against destruction. Kael had believed in it, not blindly, not the way young people believe in things before the world teaches them otherwise. He had believed in it the way an engineer believes in a load-bearing structure he has inspected personally and found sound. He had believed in it until day one. Day one was when the sensors picked up the fleet. Kyle had been in his workshop when the alert came through, not his official workspace at the Communications Authority, his real workshop, the room at the back of his house where he kept the old equipment. The decommissioned relay boards, the analog frequency modulators, from 3 decades past, the things his colleagues had called antiques and he had called insurance. His daughter called it the Museum of Obsession. He had argued that there was a difference. He was no longer certain he had won that argument. The alert came through on the central network at 0612, and for approximately 40 seconds, every screen on HFY Prime displayed the same 3 words. Unregistered fleet detected. Kyle read it, set down the relay board he had been calibrating, picked up his coat, and walked to the Communications Authority building 17 minutes away on foot because the transit system had already begun to congest with people who had also read the 3 words and were not entirely sure what to do with them. He knew what to do. He had spent 30 years thinking about exactly this, not because he had believed it would happen, because he was the kind of man who could not help thinking about what would happen if it did. The kind of man his wife had once told him brings an umbrella on the sunniest day of the year and is never once embarrassed about it. She had not meant it as a criticism. He had chosen to hear it as a compliment. He missed her every day. He missed her especially now walking through a city that had not yet understood what the 3 words meant. People were standing in doorways checking their screens, talking to each other in the careful, slightly elevated voices that come out when adults are frightened and trying not to show it. A woman near the market was still arranging her display of morning silk. Her hands had slowed, but they had not stopped. Kyle walked past her and thought, "We are gardeners and glassmakers. We trade silk and crystal. We do not build warships." He thought we were never supposed to need them. The Creehorn. That was the name that came through on the intelligence feed 6 hours after the initial detection. A hunting swarm. That was the official classification. A force that moved from world to world along a path that had no logic except hunger and left behind only the kind of evidence that required no interpretation. Kyle had heard of them. Most people had heard of them the way you hear of weather systems in distant regions. Something real, something terrible, something happening to someone else. The closest Creehorn attack in recorded memory had been 40 light years away. 40 light years was a number large enough to feel like safety. It was not large enough. The Creehorn fleet would reach HFY Prime in 14 days. The ambassador sent the formal request to the Great Compact Council the same afternoon. Kyle was in the room when she made the call. He was there because she had asked him to be there. Because in a crisis, you gather the people who understand the systems, and Kyle understood all of them. The call connected immediately. What followed was 6 days. 6 days of voices Kyle could hear but not see. Delegates from worlds whose names he knew from trade manifests and navigation charts, speaking in the formal register of people conducting important business at a comfortable distance from the emergency in question. They used words like proportional response and resource allocation and strategic theater of engagement. They used the phrase assessed value of intervention. 6 days of that, while an enemy fleet crossed the space between stars. While KL sat in the council chamber and watched the position tracker update every 4 hours and did the mathematics that no one in the room wanted to do out loud. Each update moved the marker closer. Each day, the window for action shortened. On day 3, the deputy ambassador leaned over to KL during a recess and said very quietly that she was not certain the council intended to act in time. KL had already known. He had known since day 1. But hearing it said aloud in that quiet, factual voice made something settle in his chest. The particular weight of a thing confirmed. He thanked her. He returned to his position at the communications console, and he began very quietly to run alternative frequencies, just in case. The council vote came through on day 6. Kyle was alone in the signal room when it arrived. He had sent the others to rest. They had argued. He had been politely immovable. They had gone. The transmission came in at 2,247. He read it 3 times. The language was careful, precise, the kind of language that has been reviewed by many people whose primary concern is that nothing in it can later be used against them. It cited resource constraints. It cited the complexity of the operational theater. It cited near the end something called the Assessed Strategic Contribution Index of the target world, which was a phrase Kyle had never encountered before and immediately understood completely. It meant you are not worth enough to save. The channel closed. Not with ceremony, it just stopped. The sound in the room was not silence exactly. It was the sound of every frequency that was no longer transmitting, which is its own particular kind of quiet. Kyle sat with it for 90 seconds. He had always believed in giving difficult things their proper time. Rushing past them did not make them smaller. It just meant you carried them without looking at them, which was worse. Then he began preparing the evacuation coordination protocols. But first, there was something else, something that had arrived at his personal terminal 40 minutes before the council vote. Something he had read once set aside and not yet fully processed. A message from a name he recognized. Ambassador Vorn, senior diplomatic delegate. 14 years on the Compact Council. A man Cale had met twice in person and found on both occasions to be the rare kind of bureaucrat who had not entirely lost the ability to feel uncomfortable about things that warranted discomfort. The message was brief. It contained an attachment. Kyle opened it. What he read was not a vote justification. It was not a policy document. It was a transcript of a session that had occurred on day 2, the day after the Cray Horn fleet was confirmed, before the formal deliberations had even begun. A planning session. The transcript was 12 pages long. KL read all of it. He read it again. The third time he stopped at page 7 and simply looked at the wall for a while. Because what the transcript described was not indecision. It was not bureaucratic paralysis. It was not even cowardice, though cowardice would have been easier to accept. What it described was mathematics. The council had run projections. Clean, thorough, professionally executed projections. And those projections had determined that the Creehorn fleet, once engaged in the process of attacking Ashway Prime, would be slowed, delayed, occupied for approximately 6 to 10 days. 6 to 10 days during which 3 other worlds, 3 worlds with higher assessed strategic contribution indices, would be able to complete defensive installations that were currently 60 to 80% operational. Ashway Prime was not being abandoned because it was too costly to save. It was being used. There was a phrase in the transcript that Kyle read 4 times, a phrase from a senior delegate whose name he did not recognize, a phrase recorded in clean, neutral, administrative language with no apparent awareness that it was the most obscene sentence Kale had ever seen written down. Tactical delay through planetary engagement offers acceptable return on collateral cost. Collateral cost, 11 billion people. Collateral cost. Kale put the recorder down on the console. He did not throw it. He was not a man who threw things. He set it down carefully and sat with his hands flat on his knees and breathed the way his father had taught him to breathe when he was 7 years old and had scraped both palms falling from the harbor dock. Slow, even, through the nose. His father, Oren, who was at this moment approximately 3 kilometers away in the house where Kale had grown up. In the kitchen, probably. His father was always in the kitchen at this hour. Kyle picked up his comm and called him. Oren answered on the second ring. Kyle said, "You need to pack." There was a pause. The particular pause of a man who has already been watching the news and has already made certain decisions about what he is and is not going to do about it. "How long do we have?" his father said. 4 days after the evacuation loads. We have 3 days to fill the transports before the window closes. Another pause. How many ships? Every transport we own, every cargo hauler, every small craft that still flies. And how many people fit? Kyle closed his eyes. 2 million. The silence that followed was the silence of a man doing subtraction. 11 billion minus 2 million. "I see," Oren said. "There is a seat with your name on it, Baba. I need you to take it." "Is there a seat with your name on it?" Kyle did not answer immediately. Kyle, someone needs to stay and coordinate the signal array. Someone needs to keep transmitting the truth out into the... Is there a seat with your name on it? Yes, I'm not going to use it. Another pause, longer than the others. Then neither am I, Oren said. And the line stayed open, which was his father's way of saying the conversation was not over, but he was done arguing for the moment. Come for breakfast tomorrow. Whatever happens next, we are not doing it without breakfast first. Kyle said yes, he meant it. The evacuation took 3 days. Kyle had designed the coordination protocols himself years before as a theoretical exercise. The kind of exercise that government offices commission and file away and hope never to retrieve. He had spent 40 hours on it once on a long weekend when the weather was poor and his daughter was visiting and kept interrupting him with what she called important questions, and he called evidence that she had inherited her mother's sense of timing. He had never expected to run those protocols for real. They worked better than he had feared and worse than he had hoped, which is the honest outcome of most plans when they meet an actual emergency. The transports loaded fastest in the northern districts where the port infrastructure was newest. Slower in the south where 3 of the loading cranes were out of service for maintenance that had been scheduled 6 months ago and could not now be completed in time to matter. The cargo haulers from the agricultural sectors came in waves, some of them still carrying grain and raw silk that no one had taken the time to unload because the time required to unload them would have meant fewer people in the seats. Kyle worked the communication console for 18 hours the first day, 15 the second. On the third day, his hands had developed a faint tremor that he noticed and chose not to think about. 2 million seats. In the end, they filled every single one. He watched the final transport lift from the main pad at 2109 on day 9. He watched it climb. He watched it until it was a light among other lights, and he could no longer distinguish it from the stars. Then he walked through the empty coordination center to the window that faced the residential sectors. The city was not entirely dark. Some lights were still on. People who had not been able to board, or had chosen not to, or had decided that a seat on a transport heading for an uncertain destination was not for them worth what it cost to leave. Families with elderly members who could not manage the journey. People who had looked at the numbers and decided something else. People like his father. Kyle had gone to breakfast that morning. Oren had made eggs with the spiced oil he had been using on eggs for as long as Kale could remember. They had sat at the table where Kale had done his homework as a boy, and they had eaten and they had talked about things that had nothing to do with what was coming. His father's garden. The new variety of climbing vine he had been trying to establish along the eastern fence. Whether the silk glass panels in the market district would be worth trying to preserve, or whether some things just had to be let go. Kyle had not told his father about the transcript. He had not been able to find the words that would make it sound like something a person could hear at a breakfast table and continue eating after. When he left, Oren had walked him to the door. He had put one hand on Kyle's shoulder. He had not said anything about being careful or coming back safe because Oren had never been the kind of man who said things that both people already knew. He had said the Eastern substation. You remember how it works. Kale had looked at him. I designed that substation. You designed it 15 years ago, and you have not looked at it since. I have been maintaining it. I am telling you it still works. Oren paused. Just in case. Kyle had not understood what he meant. Not yet. On day 10, Kale was alone. The Communications Authority building had been evacuated with everyone else. The official staff had gone. The equipment was running on minimal power. The signal array was broadcasting on 6 frequencies, 3 standard emergency bands, 2 deep space relays, and one that Kyle had added himself from memory because it was a frequency he had designed into the original system 15 years ago and had never reported to the council because it had not seemed worth the paperwork at the time. The quiet frequency he had always called it in his own notes, a clean channel, unregistered, available. He had thought at the time it will probably never matter. He was beginning to revise that assessment. The distress signal had been transmitting continuously for 4 days. Kyle had composed it himself. Not the standard automated distress text, A real message. Words a person had chosen. He had said who they were and what had happened and what was coming, and he had kept it short because panic makes things long, and length makes things hard to absorb, and he needed whoever received this to absorb it. He had been honest about the council vote. He had been honest about the numbers. He had been honest about the time remaining. He had not been entirely honest about one thing. In the message, he had said there were people still on the surface who needed help. He had not said how many, because the number was 9 billion, and he was not entirely sure a number that large registered as a human reality rather than an abstraction. He had learned over 30 years in communications that the biggest numbers were sometimes the least heard. So he had said, there are people here. They need help. Please come. He had said it in every language available in his translation library. He had sent it on all 6 frequencies, and he had waited. Day 10, 0240. Kyle was running a maintenance check on the signal array for the 4th time in 6 hours, not because he expected to find anything different, but because it gave his hands something to do when a piece of the transcript surfaced again in his mind. He had been doing that, not intentionally. The transcript would just appear, a sentence or a phrase from those 12 pages rising to the surface, the way things do when you have tried to put them down, but your mind has not agreed to cooperate. Tactical delay through planetary engagement. Acceptable return on collateral cost. He thought about the delegate who had said that, sitting in a chamber he would never see on a world he would never visit, using the word collateral to mean 11 billion people who grew silk and made glass and got up before sunrise to arrange their market stalls, who had believed in good faith in a promise made by civilized worlds. He thought about that for a while. Then he thought about something his father had said once years ago when KL had been going through a particularly difficult period at the Communications Authority. A period when the bureaucratic obstacles had accumulated to the point where Kyle had genuinely questioned whether the work was worth doing at all. Orrin had listened to the whole frustration without interrupting, a rare quality in a man who had opinions about most things. Then he had said, the systems fail, that is their nature. What matters is whether the people inside them fail along with the systems or do something else. Kyle had thought about that sentence many times over the years. He thought about it now. He put his hands back on the console. He ran the maintenance check again. He had almost turned off the array. He had reached for the main power switch 3 times in the preceding hour. Each time he had stopped. Not because he had a reason to stop. He did not at that point have a reason. There was no logical case for continuing to broadcast a distress signal that had produced no response in 4 days. The Kree Horn Fleet would arrive in approximately 4 days. Whatever was going to happen whether he was transmitting or not. Logic said power down, save the remaining charge for something useful. He had his hand on the switch. He did not turn it off. He was not entirely sure why. Except that turning it off felt like something different from simply stopping. It felt like agreeing, like signing a document that said, yes, you are right, we are not worth hearing. And he was not ready to sign that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Not while there was still a working signal and a man still alive to run it. He took his hand off the switch. He sat back down. And at 0341 on a frequency that was not listed in any official registry, a signal came back. Not automated, not a system ping, a voice, a real human voice. A woman's voice carrying the particular texture of someone who has been awake for a very long time and has passed the point of performing calm and arrived at the actual thing. Tired, sharp, certain. Anyone still transmitting from HFY Prime? Kale looked at the console for a moment. He pressed the transmit key. He said yes. A pause. Short. How many of you are left down there? He thought about how to answer that. He thought about the accuracy of numbers. He thought about the difference between the literal answer and the true one. I am the last one in the signal room, he said, but I am not the last one on the surface. Another pause. He heard something in the background. Voices, maybe. Systems. The particular ambient sound of a vessel in operation. "My name is Commander Rice," the voice said. "I picked up your signal on a relay 2 days ago and have been routing it through every available channel since. I have been trying to get someone with official authority to respond. They did not respond." So that was the gap. 2 days of relay routing, hitting walls, trying official channels that were either too slow or already watching the situation with their hands folded. "No," KL said. "They voted." Silence. Then she said, "Tell me what you need." And something inside KL's chest, something that had been clenched for 10 days, something he had not known was clenched until it wasn't. It did not relax exactly, but it shifted. "I need someone to come," he said, and his voice was steady. He had made sure of that. "I need someone to come before 4 days from now." Rice said, "Keep transmitting. Whatever happens next, do not stop transmitting." "I won't," Kyle said. He meant that too. He did not sleep that night. He sat at the console and monitored the signal and thought about the things you think about when the world has become very simple and very terrible at the same time. He thought about his daughter who had made it onto the second transport with her family and who had sent him a message from orbit that he had read 6 times and responded to once because he had not trusted himself to find the right words more than once. He thought about his wife, 10 years gone. A quick death, the doctors had said, as if that were a gift, and perhaps it was. She had not had to be afraid. She had not had to watch. He thought about the meaning of 30 years of work, building communication systems, designing signal arrays, spending the long middle portion of his life making sure that no matter what happened, information could move, that people could reach each other, that no one would be without a way to speak. He had thought he was building infrastructure. He was realizing, sitting in the dark at 400 with his hands on a console he had designed 15 years ago, and his father somewhere 3 kilometers away, in a house that might not exist in 4 more days, that he had been building something else. A promise. Not an official one. Not the kind with seals and signatures and articles of compact. Just the quiet kind. The kind you make without realizing it. The kind that says, as long as I am here, there will be a signal. As long as there is a signal, someone might hear it. As long as someone might hear it, coming is possible. And if coming is possible, then maybe nothing is certain yet. Dawn came slowly on HFY Prime. The twin suns rose at different angles in this season, which meant the light came in stages. First, a pale suggestion of it along the eastern ridge, then a spreading warmth across the upper atmosphere. Then finally, the moment the silk glass in the market district caught the full light and did what it always did. Kyle watched it from the viewport. He had watched this light his entire life. He had taken it for granted the way you take for granted the things that have always simply been there. He was not taking it for granted now. He picked up his recorder. "The light this morning," he said, and then stopped. He tried again. "The light this morning is doing the thing it always does, catching in the silk glass, holding it. I don't know how to describe it to someone who has never seen it. I'm not sure it can be described. Some things are just themselves, and you either know them or you don't." He paused. "I want someone to know it existed." He set the recorder down. Outside, across the quiet city, lights and windows were beginning to come on. The people who had stayed, making breakfast maybe, or simply turning lights on because the darkness had been long enough. On the console, 6 frequencies were transmitting. On the quiet channel, the unregistered one, a light blinked steadily. Commander Rice was still out there, and she had said she was not coming alone. Kyle called his father at 0730. "Breakfast," Oren said immediately without greeting. "I cannot leave the signal room." "Then I will bring breakfast to the signal room." "What floor are you on?" "Baba." "What floor?" "6. There is an elevator." "The power is reduced. It may not—" "I will take the stairs," Oren said. I am 76 years old, not dead. Give me 40 minutes. He arrived in 38, carrying a container of eggs with spiced oil, 2 cups of something hot, and a canvas bag over his shoulder that clinked faintly with the particular sound of tools. Kale looked at the bag. Oren set the food down on a clear section of the console. He looked around the room with the assessing expression of a man cataloging systems. The Eastern Substation, he said. The one I told you about. I remember. If the main array loses power, the substation can sustain transmission on 2 frequencies for approximately 18 hours. Longer if you reduce to 1. He paused. The connection panel is manual. Someone needs to be at the station to maintain it. Kyle looked at him. That station took a partial hit from the atmospheric debris last year. Part of the access corridor is unstable. I know, I repaired what I could. Oren met his eyes. I could not repair all of it. Baba. You need to stay here, Oren said simply. Someone needs to be there. Those are 2 different jobs for 2 different people. He picked up one of the cups and held the other out. Drink something. You look like you have not slept. Kale took the cup. I haven't. No. Oren looked at the blinking light on the quiet channel. Is that her, the one who answered? Yes. Oren nodded slowly. Looked at the light for a moment. The look of a man who has spent a life at sea at manual consoles and shipping lanes where signals were not guaranteed and the ones that came through anyway were the ones that mattered. He understood what it meant when someone answered. Good, he said. They ate breakfast at the signal console. Outside, the twin suns continued their climb. 4 days away across the dark between stars, something was coming. Kyle did not know yet whether it would be the thing they feared, or the thing they had stopped letting themselves hope for. He kept transmitting, because that was what you did, because that was the only thing left that he could control, because as long as there was a signal, someone might hear it. And Commander Rice had said she was not coming alone. He held on to that. He held on to that the way you hold on to the one thing that has not yet been taken. And in the signal room on the 6th floor of an evacuated building, in a city that was quiet in the way of things between one ending and whatever comes after, Kael kept his hand away from the power switch and kept transmitting because nothing was certain yet, and uncertain meant there was still time. Part 2 ships like closed fists. The quiet channel blinked for 6 hours before anything else happened. Kael watched it. He did other things while watching it. He ran diagnostics. He recalibrated the deep space relay on frequency 4. He ate half of what his father had brought and set the rest aside for later. He did all of that while keeping one eye on the small blinking light in the lower left corner of the main console, because that light meant someone was still out there. And as long as someone was still out there, the situation had not yet become the thing he was most afraid it would become, which was final. At 13:47, the quiet channel opened again. Still transmitting, Rice said. Still transmitting, Kyle said. Good. I need you to listen carefully because I'm going to say this once, and then I need to make some calls. Kyle straightened in the chair, set down the calibration tool. I'm listening. I sent your distress signal through every human frequency I have access to. There is a network, unofficial, built for exactly this. Most people call it the quiet path. A pause. Brief, like she was checking something. I sent it 14 hours ago. I am starting to get answers. Kyle looked at the blinking light, at the signal array, at the 11 screens showing 6 transmitting frequencies and 5 dead ones. What kind of answers, he said. The kind with engines, Rice said. Kale had studied human civilization the way most people in the outer world studied it, which was to say, not in any serious depth. A chapter in a trade relations course, a footnote in interstellar cartography, a young species, relatively new to deep space, modest fleet capacity, not the kind of name that appeared in the serious conversations. He knew the flag. He had looked it up once years ago in a moment of professional thoroughness, and then filed the information somewhere in the back of his mind where it had sat undisturbed. He had not thought about them again until Commander Rice answered his signal. Now he was thinking about them quite a lot. He started pulling everything the Communications Authority database had on human military architecture, which was not a great deal, but it was something. And what it told him was interesting, not because they were powerful. The assessments were mixed on that. Not because they were numerous, the numbers were modest by galactic standards, but because of a particular operational doctrine embedded in their fleet command structure. A doctrine that had no equivalent in any of the other compact signatories. He found it in a diplomatic brief from 11 years ago, written by an observer from one of the older civilizations after a joint exercise. The brief described it carefully, almost cautiously, like the observer was not entirely sure whether what they had witnessed was admirable or alarming. Standing Doctrine, that was the official name. A protocol written into human fleet command at every level, which stated in language that was simple enough to make lawyers nervous that if a signed world transmitted a distress call and no response from the compact had been authorized within a defined time window, any available human force in range was not merely permitted, but expected to respond without waiting for further authorization. Expected, not allowed. Expected. The observer's brief had noted this with what Kyle now recognized as barely concealed unease. The observer had written, "The absence of a required authorization chain creates potential for unilateral action that does not align with established compact protocols." Kale read that sentence. Then he read it again. Then he set the brief down and looked at the quiet channel. A civilization that builds a rule like that into their bones, not as an exception, not as an emergency override, as a baseline, as the answer to the question of what you do when the official channels fail. He had spent 10 days watching the official channels fail. He thought he was beginning to understand why humans made the rule. At 1800, Rice came back on. "I need to tell you something," she said. KL waited. About why I built the quiet path. Why any of us built it. He had not asked, but he listened, because there was something in her voice that said this was not personal history offered casually. This was context. The kind you give someone when you need them to understand not just what is happening, but why. "I was 19, she said. The world was called Sene, small place. Mining colony mostly. We heard a hunting swarm was coming, and we sent the distress call exactly the way the compact says to send it." She paused. "The council voted on day 5. The answer was no." Kyle did not say anything. "We evacuated who we could. I was on the 3rd transport out. We had 11 days of travel ahead of us. On the 4th day, we picked up a signal. Another ship, small, private, unregistered, no official capacity to do anything." She stopped just for a second. "They came anyway. They pulled alongside our transport, and they gave us fuel and medical supplies and a navigation correction that saved 14 hours of travel time. We were running low on everything." Another pause. "I never learned the name of the person who flew that ship. The signal was scrambled. They left before I could ask." Kale said quietly, "How old were they?" "I don't know. I never knew anything about them except that they came. Without being asked. Without being ordered. Without any reason except that we had sent a signal and they had heard it." Silence on the channel. Then Kyle said, "You built the quiet path for them." "I built the quiet path because I wanted to be them," Rice said. "Except I wanted to be them for everyone who needed it. Not just the people I happened to be near." A breath, steady. "That took 20 years. Kyle thought about that. 20 years of building something in the dark. Something unofficial. Something that would not appear on any council resource allocation chart. Something that existed entirely because one person at 19 years old had decided that the absence of a rule was not the same as the absence of a responsibility. "How many ships?" he said. "More than I expected," which means I asked right. A sound he almost identified as a smile. Keep transmitting, Kyle. We are coming. On day 11, the council activated the interference. Kyle noticed it at 0920, a degradation pattern across 3 of his 6 frequencies. Not random noise, not equipment failure. He had spent 30 years with communication systems, and he knew the difference between a system breaking down on its own and a system being pushed on from outside. He ran the diagnostic, confirmed it, ran it again. Then he sat very still for approximately 45 seconds. Because what the diagnostic was telling him was that someone had activated a jamming protocol across the standard emergency frequencies. The kind of protocol that required authorization from a compact council security committee. And there was only one reason to jam the distress frequencies of a world that the council had already voted not to save. They knew the quiet path was active. They knew ships were coming. And they had decided that if HFY Prime was saved, the transcript of their Day 2 planning session would become something worse than a secret. It would become evidence. Kyle pulled up the jamming pattern, studied it, mapped which frequencies were affected and which were not. The standard bands, the deep space relays, 4 of his 6 frequencies, not the quiet channel. Because the quiet channel did not exist in their records. He had never filed the paperwork. He had added it to the system on his own authority as the design engineer 11 years before anyone on the council had thought to regulate the frequency allocation for this sector, and he had not reported it because it had not seemed important at the time. He almost laughed. 30 years of professional thoroughness. 30 years of documenting every decision, filing every modification, maintaining records that other engineers described as obsessive, and he described as responsible. The one thing he had never gotten around to reporting. The one thing that now mattered most. He opened the quiet channel. Rice, she answered in 4 seconds, which told him she had been watching for his signal. I see it, she said. The jamming. They know. Yes, flat, certain, not surprised. How many channels do you still have? 2 clean. One is the quiet channel. One is a manual backup I have not activated yet. Can you reach anyone on the surface on those 2? He thought. The eastern substation, if it is manned. Is it manned? He picked up his personal comm, dialed his father. 3 rings, 4. Oren answered on the 5th. Kyle, Baba, the main frequencies are being jammed. I need you to be at the eastern substation. Now, can you get there? A pause, shorter than expected. I am already here, Oren said. Kyle stopped. What? I came this morning, before breakfast. His father's voice was perfectly level, the voice of a man who has done a thing and sees no reason to perform surprise about it. I thought they might try something like this. I brought the manual connection tools. Kyle looked at the console, at the blinking quiet channel, at the jamming pattern still spreading across 3 dead frequencies. His father, 76 years old, had walked to the eastern substation before breakfast, had brought tools, had sat there in a partially collapsed building waiting for exactly this moment, because he had thought they might try something like this. Because he had spent his life on the water, in the old lanes, at manual consoles, listening for signals that should not come. Because he was Oren, and Oren did not wait to be told what the situation required. The connection panel, Kale said. Manual protocol. Do you remember? I wrote the manual protocol, Oren said mildly. You designed the substation. I maintained it for 15 years. We do not have time to negotiate who knows what better. Tell me which frequencies you need. Kyle told him. He heard his father moving. The sound of tools, a heavy panel being opened, the very particular sound of manual contact connections being engaged one at a time by a man who knew exactly what he was doing. It's active, Oren said. Both frequencies. You have power. Kale checked the console. 2 new green lights appeared in the lower quadrant. He had 4 clean channels now. Not 6, not the full array, but 4 was enough to reach a ship. 4 was enough to coordinate. 4 was more than 0, which was what the council had intended for him to have. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me, Oren said. Just keep working. At 1400, they appeared on what remained of the sensor grid. Kyle had been watching the grid with the detached focus of a man who has run out of emotional bandwidth for anticipation and has moved into a state that is not quite calm, but functions like it. He had been watching empty space for 11 days. He had learned to read its textures, the background drift of dust and particulate, the regular sweep of the outer beacon, the nothing that was just nothing. Then the nothing changed, ships. Not the graceful profile of compact cruisers, not the elongated, elegant lines of the older civilizations that had been building warships for centuries and had developed opinions about how they should look. These were different. They were thick, heavy, built close to themselves as if the designers had decided that space was not a medium to move through elegantly, but a force to push against directly. No sweeping curves, no extended wing structures, no visual language of speed or grace, just mass and purpose. Kyle stared at the sensor readout. He had read in the old diplomatic brief that someone had once described human warships as looking like closed fists. He had thought that was a metaphor, a figure of speech. It was not a metaphor. They looked exactly like that, like something made to hold ground and not move from it. He counted them as they resolved on the grid. 1, 3, 7, 12. More coming in at the edges of sensor range, still decelerating, taking up positions with a methodical efficiency that was nothing like what he had seen in any compact fleet exercise. No single command ship at the center, no obvious hierarchy of formation. They were spreading out, distributing, taking up positions at angles he did not immediately understand. He opened the quiet channel. I see you on the sensor grid, he said. Good, Rice said. How much do you know about defensive dispersion arrays? Theoretically, not practically. Here is the practical version. We are spacing to cover the widest possible approach vectors. The Kreehorn will expect a concentrated defense because that is what every other fleet in the compact uses. They will not expect to find the coverage spread this wide. A pause. It limits what any individual ship can do, but it limits what they can do to us too. Kyle looked at the pattern forming on the grid, thought about it. The way an engineer thinks about load distribution, not concentrating stress at one point, spreading it across the whole structure so that no single failure point brings everything down. You are trading offensive capacity for resilience, he said. We are trading everything that looks impressive for everything that actually works, Rice said. Those are not always the same thing. No, they were not. He had spent 30 years learning that they were not. Rice, he said, yes. How many ships did you lose to get here? A pause. None, yet. She said it without drama, just information. We travel fast when we need to. And the people on those ships, they came voluntarily. They came because they heard the call, she said. Same as me. He thought about that, about 23 ships, about the people on each of them, who had been doing something else somewhere else and had heard a frequency click open and a voice they did not know describing a world they had probably never visited and had made a decision. Not a committee decision, not a vote that took 6 days. A single decision. By a single person. In the time it takes to change course. Why? He said. And he meant it as a real question. Not rhetorical. He genuinely wanted to understand the mechanism. The thing that made that decision possible. Quick, uncomplicated. Reese was quiet for a moment. Someone sent a distress call, she said. That is the whole reason, nothing else. He sat with that. It was the simplest answer he had ever received to a question that had felt complicated. He was not sure yet whether the simplicity was the answer or just the surface of it. but he held it the way you hold something you are not ready to put down. On day 12, Kale found the second thing the transcript had not told him. He had been going through the council communications archive, not because he expected to find anything new, but because going through it again gave him something systematic to do in the hours between frequency checks. And systematic work was what kept his hand steady. He found it in a secondary appendix, filed under a classification heading he had seen before but not fully parsed. An assessment, pre-vote, compiled by the Council's Strategic Analysis Division. It was not about HFY Prime. It was about the 7 worlds that came before. 7 worlds, over 40 years. All of them small, all of them with low assessed strategic contribution indices. All of them had sent distress calls to the Council. All of them had received votes, and all of those votes had been no. The assessment was not a record of shame. It was a record of outcomes, presented cleanly, without emotional language, the way you present a performance review. Of the 7 worlds, 3 had been completely destroyed. 2 had survived partial attacks through their own means and were still attempting to rebuild. 2 had evacuation percentages that the report described as within acceptable parameters. Acceptable parameters. He found that phrase 3 times in the document. He thought about what it meant to build a vocabulary in which the survival of some fraction of a civilization was described as acceptable. You would have to practice that language for a long time. You would have to say those words many times in many meetings before they stopped feeling wrong and started feeling like information. He thought about how long it took a system to learn to speak that way. And then he thought about Rice, who had been on one of those worlds, who had been on a transport running low on supplies, who had been saved by a ship with a scrambled signal that had not waited for authorization, who had spent 20 years building a network so that no one else would have to wait. He opened the quiet channel. Rice, here, the Council's Strategic Analysis Division. They have been tracking this for 40 years, 7 worlds before ours. A pause, long enough that he thought the channel had degraded. Then she said, I know. You knew. I knew about 4 of them. I have been searching for the others for years. Another pause. Shorter. Are you going to be all right? It was such an unexpected question. In the middle of everything, in the practical hours of the day before the Crayhorn arrived, an unexpected question about whether he was going to be all right. He almost said yes automatically, the way you do. Instead, he said, I don't know yet. Fair answer, she said. Keep transmitting. On day 13, Kayla's father called him at 200, which meant Oren had not slept, which meant Oren was sitting at the eastern substation at 2 in the morning, holding a manual contact panel active by hand, because that was what the situation required, and Oren had never needed a different reason. There is something I want to tell you, Oren said. Kyle set down the frequency log. I'm listening. When you were 8 years old, you were very sick. The fever kind of sick. The kind where you do not know where you are, and you kept asking for your mother. Oren paused. She was at sea, working, the kind of work that does not stop because someone is sick at home. Kale remembered being sick. He did not remember this specifically. 8 was a long time ago. I sat with you for 4 days, Oren said. I did not sleep. I held your hand most of it. Not because I thought it would help medically. I had no particular evidence that it would. I just did not want you to reach for something in the dark and find nothing. Silence on the line. I am telling you this, Oren said carefully, because I think you have been in that dark for 10 days, reaching, and I want you to know that I am still here, that I have not gone anywhere, that when you reach, there is something to find. Kyle put one hand over his eyes. He was not going to cry. He was a 52-year-old man sitting at a communications console waiting for a hunting swarm to arrive, and he was absolutely not going to cry. He cried a little. Not much. Not dramatically. The quiet kind. The kind that does not require sound. Baba, he said when he could. Hmm. When this is over, I'm going to need you to take a real rest. When this is over, Oren said, I'm going to sleep for 3 days, and then I'm going to fix the east fence because that climbing vine is getting out of hand, and your mother would have opinions about it. Kyle laughed, surprised by it. A real laugh, sudden and short, the kind that comes out when you did not know it was there. She would, he said. She always did. Oren agreed, warmly. Get some sleep, Kale. A few hours. I will watch the panel. The channel. I will watch the channel too. I am old. I am not useless. Kyle almost argued. He did not argue. He leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes. And for the first time in 4 days, he slept. He woke at 0540. The quiet channel was blinking. Active. Rice had been transmitting a low-signal carrier wave through the night. Not a message, just presence. The electronic equivalent of a light left on. He understood why she had asked about his father. Because she had known what Oren would do. She had understood it the way someone understands the behavior of a person who is made of the same material as something they have already seen. Someone else had once stayed on a signal for her. Someone else had held a line through the dark so she would not reach for something and find nothing. She had wanted to know if Cale had that. He did. He opened the channel. I slept, he said. Good, she said. You kept the carrier wave on. Old habit from the early days of the quiet path, before we had enough people to cover everything. A pause. Nobody should wake up to silence if they can help it. Kyle looked at the sensor grid. The human ships had settled into their positions overnight. 23 of them now, spread across the approach vectors in the pattern Reese had described. They looked from the sensor readout like something scattered, something unformed. He was beginning to understand that was deliberate. They did not look like what they were, which was exactly the point. Rice, he said. Yes. Is your crew ready? My crew has been ready since we changed course. They are the kind of people who are always ready. That is why they are on this ship. A breath. Is your father ready? He is at the substation. He has been there since yesterday morning. A pause. He held the panel manually all night. Yes, quiet on the channel. The particular quiet of someone who has just received information that means something to them. Tell him, she said, and then stopped. Started again. Tell him thank you for staying at the panel. Tell him it mattered. I will, Cale said. How is he? Stubborn, functional, talking about his garden. Good, she said. And there was something in the words, something that was not just professional, something that came from a woman who had been 19 years old on a transport running low on supplies and had been held in the dark for 4 days by the carrier wave of a ship with a scrambled signal. Something that understood what it meant to stay. Day 14 arrived without announcement. It was just 0000 and then 0001, and the date changed on the console and the clock kept moving, and that was that. Kyle watched the sensor grid. At 0347, the Krehorn fleet began to resolve on the outer sensors. Not what he had expected. He had expected something that looked like a fleet in the way he understood fleets. Ordered, formation structured, the kind of thing that registered on a grid as a pattern. What came instead was a texture, a mass of signatures that moved together the way water moves, not in lines, in saturation. Filling the approach vector the way something fills a space when there is enough of it, that form becomes secondary to presence. He had read the descriptions. He had read the histories. He had studied what he could find in the database. It was different. Looking at it on the grid was different. He opened the quiet channel. I see them, he said. We see them, Rice said. I need you to do something for me now. Name it. I need you to move away from the viewport. Get to the interior rooms. Lowest floor you can reach quickly. Take your recorder. Take your personal comm. He started to say he needed to stay at the console. The array will transmit without you physically present, she said, before he could say it. You designed it that way. You told me, so you don't need to be in front of it. A pause. I need you to survive the next 12 hours. Is that understood? He looked at the console, at the 6 frequencies, at the quiet channel light steady and clear. My father, he said, is at the substation, which is ground level and structurally reinforced along the north wall, which I know because I asked him directly at 0130, and he described the layout in more detail than I required. Another pause. Something in her voice he had not heard before. Not quite warmth, something more like recognition. He is going to be fine, and you are going to be fine. But I need both of you in the safest positions possible before this starts. Kael stood up. He picked up his recorder, his personal comm, the small canvas bag his father had carried up on the first morning with the food and the tools now empty, which he had kept for no reason he could articulate, except that throwing it away had felt wrong. He looked at the console one more time. 6 frequencies transmitting. The quiet channel clear and steady. Rice, he said. Yes. Whatever happens, what you have done, what all of them have done, coming here, I don't have a word for it that feels sufficient. A pause. You don't need a word for it, she said. You just need to keep transmitting. That's your job right now. The array runs itself. Your job is to survive and keep the signal going. Another pause. Shorter. Can you do that? Yes, he said. Then go. Take the stairs. Interior wall. Go. He went. Behind him the console hummed. The frequencies transmitted. The quiet channel blinked. And outside, across the dark between stars, 23 ships shaped like closed fists moved into position. For a world that appeared on no strategic value ledger. For people they had never met. For a signal that someone had sent and they had heard. Kael descended 3 floors and found a room with interior walls on all sides and a working emergency light in a corner where the structural columns were thickest. He sat down against the wall with his recorder in one hand and his personal comm in the other. He pressed record. He said, Day 14, pre-engagement. I am 3 floors below the signal room. The array is transmitting. My father is at the eastern substation. Commander Rice and 23 ships are in position. The Horn are on the approach sensors. He paused. I am not a soldier. I have never been a soldier. I am a retired telecommunications engineer sitting against a wall in a building that may or may not survive the next 12 hours, with a personal recorder and a comm device, and the knowledge that 2 frequencies are currently being manually maintained by my 76-year-old father in a partially collapsed substation 3 kilometers away. He looked at the ceiling. I am also, for the first time in 14 days, not entirely without hope. He paused again. I don't know what that means for what comes next. I am not going to claim certainty I don't have. But it is real. The hope is real. It came from a frequency I almost never reported. From a woman I have never met in person. From 23 ships that look nothing like anything I would have imagined help looking like. The building made a sound, not from outside, just the settling kind. Old structures in reduced power modes did that sometimes. He kept going. If anyone hears this later, if this recording reaches someone after whatever comes next, I want them to know that HFY Prime was not silent. We were never silent. We transmitted the entire time. And when the official channels failed us, when every promise that was supposed to matter did not matter, there was still a signal. He stopped. Then he said the last thing, and someone answered. He held the recorder for a while, then his personal comm lit up. A text message from his father. 3 words. Panel is active. Kael looked at the 3 words for a long time. He sent back 2. I know. Above him, the signal array transmitted on 4 clean frequencies and 2 that should not have existed. Outside, the sky was about to change. And somewhere above that sky, 23 ships that looked like closed fists were already in position, waiting, holding, because that was what they had come to do. Part 3. One reason. The first explosion lit the sky at 0412. Kyle heard it before he saw it, a sound that was not quite sound, more like pressure, the kind that passes through walls and floors and the marrow of your bones and reminds you that there are forces in the universe that do not require your permission to exist. He was still against the interior wall, 3 floors down, recorder in one hand, comm in the other. He had been sitting there for 4 hours and 22 minutes, and he had not moved except to check the comm every 11 minutes. Not because checking it changed anything, because it was the only action available to him, and he had learned in the long hours of the past 2 weeks that a person needs to be doing something, even something small, even something that changes nothing. His father had not sent another message, which meant his father was busy, which meant the panel was still active, which was the only thing that mattered right now. He pressed record. 0412, first engagement sounds confirmed. Cannot see the engagement from current position. The building is holding. Transmission is active on 4 frequencies. He paused. I am not sure what to say into this recorder right now. I have been a man who always knew what to say into recording equipment. That was my work for 30 years, finding the right signal, the right frequency, the right language for the information that needed to move. He stopped, started again. I don't have the right language for this, so I am just going to keep talking until I do. The battle lasted through the night. Kyle experienced it the way civilians experience all battles that happen above their heads, in fragments, in sound and light and secondhand information arriving in pieces that did not always connect cleanly into a coherent picture. He heard the impacts. They came in waves, some close enough to shake dust from the ceiling in small cascading falls that caught the emergency light, some distant enough to be almost abstract, a rumble at the edge of perception that his brain kept trying to categorize as thunder. It was not thunder. He watched the light through the narrow ground-level vent that gave him a partial view of the sky to the east. Not enough to understand what he was seeing, but enough to see that the sky was doing things it had never done before. Colors that had no names in any language he knew. Patterns that his visual system tried to parse as something familiar and could not. He watched anyway, because he could not look away. And because somewhere in that changed sky, 23 ships were holding a line above his world, for no reason that would appear in any council ledger or assessed value index, just because a signal had gone out and they had heard it. He held that thought. He held it the way his father had held a manual contact panel all night in a partially collapsed building. Not because holding it was comfortable, because putting it down was not an option. At 0619, the quiet channel opened. Not Rice, a different voice, male, younger, the particular controlled thinness of someone holding themselves together through concentration. This is Lieutenant Tavek, acting on Commander Rice's authority. Can you hear me? KL sat forward. I hear you. Where is Rice? A pause. Short. The kind that contains something. The commander's ship sustained significant damage at 0531. She is still aboard. She is still operational. A breath. Controlled. She is coordinating from the damaged vessel. How damaged? Enough that I am making this call instead of her. Kyle understood what that meant. He made himself sit with the understanding. He did not let it become panic. Panic was a signal too, just not a useful one. What do you need from me, he said. Nothing right now. She wanted you to know the status. She asked me to tell you specifically. Another pause. She said to tell you the eastern signal is still coming through. Clear on all our receivers. Oren, still at the panel. Tell her I received, Kale said. Tell her thank you. I will. The channel stayed open a second longer than necessary. Your father has been transmitting on manual for 9 hours straight. We have been using that frequency as a positioning anchor. Without it, we would have had 2 gaps in the coverage array. A pause. He probably does not know that. He knows, Kale said, because Oren had always known. He had just never needed to be told it mattered to keep doing it. The sky changed again at 0744. Kyle was watching the vent. He had been watching it for 3 hours with the intermittent focus of a man who has nothing else he can usefully do and has made a kind of peace with that limitation. The color shifted, not the violent shifting of the night hours. Something else. The sky was not calm, but it was different. The kind of different that comes after something has broken, after the peak has passed and what remains is the settling. He opened his comm and called his father. 7 rings. 8, his chest did something unpleasant. 9. Kyle. Oren's voice, rough, not injured rough, tired rough. The voice of a man who has been concentrating on one task for so long that everything else has gone slightly dim. Kyle exhaled. How are you? My hands are tired, Oren said. The panel has been active for 9 hours and 20 minutes. My hands are very tired. A pause. I am otherwise fine. Can you hold the connection? I am holding the connection. That is what fine means. Kyle almost laughed, the way he had laughed 2 nights ago, surprised, sudden, unwilled. Baba, the colors in the sky changed. A pause, longer. I noticed, Oren said, and his voice did something then, shifted, dropped slightly. The voice of a man who has been waiting for something and thinks he might be seeing it arrive. I noticed. At 0831, Tvek came back on the quiet channel. They are pulling back. 3 words, simple. The weight of them was not simple at all. Kyle pressed both hands flat on the floor beneath him, grounding himself, because the weight of those 3 words was significant, and significant things deserve to be received properly. The formation broke, he said. The outer elements began withdrawing at 0800. The core is following. A pause. They did not expect the distribution array. They expected a concentrated defense they could overwhelm at the focal point. There was no focal point. Another pause, shorter. Commander Rice designed the array herself 4 months ago. She has been thinking about this for 4 months. Kyle thought about that. A woman who had been planning for the call before the call came, who had spent 20 years building a network, in 4 months designing a defensive configuration for a scenario she could not have known would be this one, who had simply kept thinking, kept preparing, against the day when the signal would arrive and there would be no time to prepare then. Tavek, he said. Yes. The commander, what is her actual status? A pause, the kind that is longer than the information requires. She is coordinating, he said. You said that before. Yes. What are you not telling me? Silence on the channel, approximately 4 seconds. The ship took 3 direct impacts. The hull is intact, but the propulsion system is offline. Life support is on emergency reserve. A breath. She has been coordinating from a section with functioning communications in compromised atmosphere for the past 2 hours. Kyle closed his eyes. She is still transmitting. She has not stopped transmitting since the engagement began. Tavek's voice was precise, professional, but underneath it, something that was not professional at all. She is very good at not stopping. Yes, Kale said. I know. He did know. He knew because he had watched her do it. From the moment she first answered on a frequency that should not have existed, she had not stopped. Not when the council jammed the standard bands. Not when the Crayhorn arrived. Not when her ship took 3 direct impacts. She just kept going. The way people who build things from nothing keep going. Because they know what stopping costs. Because they were 19 years old once on a transport running low, and they know exactly what it means when the signal does not come. Tell her the signal is still transmitting, he said. Tell her we are still here. The Cree Horn Formation completed its withdrawal at 11:04. Kyle knew it because the sky went still, not quiet. The aftermath of something large is never quiet, but still. The way a sea goes still after a storm, not peaceful, just no longer in motion. He sat against the wall for another 20 minutes after that, not because he thought anything else was coming, but because his legs had made it clear they were not ready to function yet, and he was willing to give them the time they needed. Then he stood. He climbed 3 floors. He walked into the signal room. The console was exactly as he had left it. 6 frequencies transmitting, the quiet channel active, the jamming pattern still present on the dead bands, which meant the council had not yet pulled it, which meant they had not yet decided what to do about any of this. He sat in the chair. He called his father. Oren answered on the first ring this time. I am going to let go of the panel now, Oren said. Yes, you can let go. Are you certain? The battle is over, Baba. You can let go. A pause, and he heard it. The sound of a man releasing something he has been holding for 10 hours and 17 minutes. Not dramatic, just the sound of a grip finally opening. The particular exhale of a body that has been sustaining effort and is now permitted to stop. Good, Oren said. His voice was different now, quieter, the effort of the night catching up. Good. Stay where you are, Kyle said. I am coming to you. I am fine. I know you are fine. I am still coming. A pause. Bring something to eat, Oren said. I have been here since yesterday morning and I forgot breakfast. The Eastern substation was 12 minutes on foot from the Communications Authority building. Kyle walked it in 9. The city around him was strange in the morning light. Not destroyed, not as he had feared. There was debris in the streets. There were sections where the atmospheric impacts had cracked facades and shattered the silk glass in some of the older buildings. But the streets were there. The buildings were mostly there. The twin suns were in the sky doing exactly what they always did. He had not been certain for some of the night hours that he would see that again. The Eastern substation was a low concrete structure behind what had been a water treatment facility. One section of the exterior wall had partially collapsed, exactly as Kyle had known, which was why he was walking faster than he had originally intended and trying not to think too carefully about what he might find. The north wall was intact. He found his father sitting on the floor of the main equipment room with his back against the north wall and his legs straight out in front of him and his hands in his lap. His coat was dusty. His face was gray with tiredness. The manual contact panel on the far wall had 2 connection leads hanging loose where Oren had finally released them. He was looking at the ceiling. When Kyle came through the door, Oren turned his head slowly. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Oren said, "Did you bring food?" Kyle held up the container he had found in the break room of the communications building. Someone had left it. He did not know whose it was. He had taken it anyway. Close enough, Oren said. Kyle sat on the floor next to his father. He opened the container. He handed half of it to Oren without looking at him directly, because looking at him directly right now was not something he was capable of managing without losing his composure entirely. They ate on the floor of a partially collapsed substation, with debris outside and dead frequencies on the bands that the council had jammed, and the end of a battle that had not ended the way the council had intended. They ate. It was one of the best meals Kyle had ever had. They sat there for a long time after the food was gone, not talking, not needing to. Outside through the gap in the collapsed section of wall, Kale could see a strip of sky. The twin suns were doing their ordinary morning work. Light on the ordinary world. Oren said eventually, "The vine. I know. It really has gotten out of hand. I know, Baba. Your mother would have said something about it weeks ago. She would have said something about it in spring," Kale said, "before it got this far." Oren made a sound that was almost a laugh. Yes, she would have. They sat with that for a while too, and then Kyle helped his father to his feet, and they walked home through a city that was still standing, and neither of them talked about what had almost happened because both of them already knew, and some things do not need to be said to be understood. Tavek found Kyle on day 17. The human relief convoy had arrived 2 days earlier. 12 ships carrying medical personnel and supplies and engineers and people whose specific skill was helping other people figure out where to start when what needs to be rebuilt is everything. They had come without being asked for separately, or rather, they had come because someone had asked, into a frequency, into the dark, and they had heard. Tavik was younger than Kale had expected, mid to late 20s, lean in the way of someone who has spent time in environments where everything non-essential has been stripped away. He had the eyes of a person who has been in difficult situations recently and is still taking inventory of what remains. He found Kyle in the market district. Kyle had been there for the morning, not for any specific task, just to be there. The silk glass had survived better than he had feared. Some of it was cracked, some sections had come down entirely, but a significant portion was intact. And in the morning light, it was still catching, still holding, the way it always had. He heard footsteps behind him. He turned. Tavek said, "You are Kyle." "Yes, I am Lieutenant Tavek. I served under Commander Rice." Past tense. Kyle heard it. He had been expecting it since day 14. He had heard it in the length of Tavek's silences on the channel, in the things not said, in the way Tavek had described her in that last call, in a voice that was precise and careful and working very hard. He had known, but hearing it confirmed standing in the morning light with the silk glass catching the twin suns behind him. He stood with it for a moment. When he said, "Day 15, 2 days after the engagement ended, the life support on the damaged section gave out." Tavek said it steadily, the voice of someone who has said it many times now and has found the way through it. She was still transmitting at the end, coordinating the relief convoy approach vectors. A pause. She did not stop until she could not. Of course she did not stop. "She asked about your father," Tavek said. "In one of her last transmissions to me, she asked if he was all right." Kyle looked at the silk glass for a moment. "He is all right," he said. "He is at home. He slept for 16 hours. He is worried about his climbing vine." Something crossed Tavek's face. Not a smile exactly. The shape of what a smile would be when there was enough room for it again. "Good," he said. They stood together for a moment in the morning light. Then Kale asked the question that had been sitting in his chest since day 10, since the quiet channel first blinked, since a tired, sharp voice had asked if anyone was still transmitting, and he had said yes and the world had not ended. "Why," he said, "all of you, ships you could not spare, people whose lives were not Ashway Prime's problem. Why?" Tavik looked at him the way someone looks at a question they have been asked before and have found the answer to by living through the thing that makes the answer simple. "Someone sent a distress call," he said. "That was the whole reason." He said it the way Rice had said it, not as a performance, not as a speech, as information, as a fact so basic it barely needed saying. Kyle looked at the silk glass. He did not say anything for a while. Then he said, "She built the quiet path for 20 years. Yes, for a situation like this, for any situation like this, for all of them." "She was 19, Kale said, "when she lost her world, when someone came without being ordered." "Yes." "She never knew who that was." "No." Tavek paused. "But she knew what they did, and she decided that knowing what they did was enough to spend 20 years doing the same thing for other people." Kale thought about that, about the mathematics of it, not the strategic kind, not the assessed contribution index kind, the other kind. One person, 19 years old, saved by a ship with a scrambled signal that asked for nothing. spends 20 years building a network so that the next time and the time after that, the signal would be heard. And then one day she hears a signal herself, and she comes, and she coordinates 23 ships from a damaged vessel in compromised atmosphere. And she does not stop until she cannot. And the world she saved never even knew her name before she came. It was not a debt that could be repaid. It was not supposed to be. It was supposed to become something else. You received the thing, and then you found a way to become it for someone else. That was the whole architecture. On day 22, Kyle appeared before the Compact Council by remote link. Not because the council had asked, because Ambassador Vorn had sent him a private message that was very short and very direct. He had said they will let you speak if you ask. Ask. Bring everything. Kale had asked. He had brought everything. He had brought the recorder, every transmission from the 14 days, the quiet channel logs, the diagnostic evidence of the jamming protocol activation, the transcript, all 12 pages from day 2, the phrase about acceptable return on collateral cost. He had also brought something he had not planned to bring until the night before when Tvek had delivered it. A final recording from Rice, made on day 15, in the hours when the life support on her section was failing and she was still coordinating approach vectors, and she had found in some window of time he could not imagine having the presence of mind to find a moment to speak. 4 minutes, that was all. She had not addressed it to anyone specific. She had not made it a statement or a speech or a last testament designed for effect. She had just spoken in the same tired, sharp, certain voice he had heard on day 10. She had described what the quiet path was, why it had been built, who was on the ships that had come, what they had come from. And at the end, she had said one thing he had not expected. She had said, "If anyone asks you why, tell them the answer is simple. There is nothing complicated about hearing someone and deciding to go. The complicated part is building a world where that decision is easy to make, where it does not require heroism, where it is just what you do." She had paused. "We are not there yet, but we are trying." Then the recording ended. Kyle had listened to it 3 times the night before the council session. He had not been able to find anything sufficient to say about it, so he had simply decided to play it for the people who needed to hear it most. The council chamber appeared on his remote screen exactly as he had imagined such chambers appeared, designed to make the people in it feel significant and the people appearing before it feel small. He did not feel small. He felt like a man who had spent 14 days transmitting into the dark and had learned something about what it means to keep going when the official answer is no. He waited for the procedural formalities to conclude. Then he spoke. He did not raise his voice. He had learned over a career in communications that raising your voice was what you did when you were not certain the information itself was sufficient. He was certain. He said, "I am Kale. I am the last administrator to transmit from HFY Prime during the 14 days of the Kree Horn approach. I am here because Ambassador Vorn suggested I come. And I am here because I think you should see what you actually did." He played the transcript first, all 12 pages, in full. He did not summarize. He did not select the most damning sections. He played it completely because selective presentation was a tool of people who were not certain the whole truth was enough. He was certain. Acceptable return on collateral cost. The phrase moved through the room. He watched the delegates. Some looked at the table. Some looked at the screen. A few looked at him directly. One on the far left of the chamber had closed his eyes. Then he played the jamming protocol evidence. Then he played Rice's recording. He played all 4 minutes of it without narration, without context. He just let her speak. In a room where she had never been, for delegates who had voted before she could arrive. When the recording ended, the silence lasted longer than most silences in formal proceedings. Then KL said, "My world is rebuilding. The silk glass is coming back. The gardens are coming back. My father is home. The people who stayed are working." He paused. "We lost ships that came to help us. We lost Commander Rice, who built the network that saved us, and who coordinated our defense from a damaged vessel until the atmosphere in her section ran out. We lost her. Not Ashway Prime, not in the collateral sense. A person, a specific person with a name and a history and 20 years of work behind her who chose at the end to spend whatever time she had left making sure the approach vectors were clean. He stopped. He said, "I am not here to ask for an apology. I am here because I want you to have seen it. The full thing, not the assessed value version, the actual version." He picked up his recorder. He said someone sent a distress call. Someone answered it. Those are the two facts. Everything else is paperwork. He closed the connection. He did not know yet what the council would decide. He was not sure, sitting in the empty communications building in the quiet of the afternoon, that it mattered to him the way he had once thought it would. He had said what was true. He had put the evidence on the table. He had let Rice speak in a room she never reached. The rest was up to the delegates, and up to time, and up to the 7 worlds in that document whose names he had now memorized. 2 days later, Vorn called him. The sanctions vote passed, Vorn said, without preamble, because Vorn was the kind of man who had learned that waiting to say difficult things did not make them smaller. Kale had expected it, not because he had lost faith, because he understood how these things moved. And the abstentions, he said. A pause. 7, Vorn said. Kale sat with the number. Which worlds? Vorn read him the names. He recognized 4 of them immediately. They were in the document. The assessment. The one with acceptable parameters. The worlds that had come before Ashway Prime in 40 years of the same decision made by the same system for the same reasons. The other 3 had not known the full scope until his testimony. They have requested the complete historical record, Vorn said. All 7 prior cases, all 4 decades. Kyle looked out the window. The market district below was moving again. Slowly. Someone had already begun resetting the silk glass displays. The pieces that had survived were back in position. The morning light was doing the thing it always did. The sanctions will hold, Kale said. For now. Yes. For now. These things move slowly, Vorn said. I know that is not what anyone wants to hear. No. Kale was quiet for a moment, but slowly is not the same as not at all. No, Vorn agreed. It is not. The abstentions are on record, Kyle said. The testimony is on record. The transcript is on record. Yes. And Rice's recording. Also on record, formally entered. It will not be removed. Kyle thought about that, about what it meant for something to be on record. Not the legal meaning, the other meaning. The one that says this happened. This was real. This was said by a person who existed, and the person existed, and what they built existed, and it mattered. And now the record said so. Vorn, he said. Yes. Thank you for the transcript, for suggesting I come, for being the kind of person who makes that choice inside a system designed to make it difficult. A long pause. I have been on the council for 14 years, Vorn said. I have voted correctly more times than not. I have voted incorrectly more times than I would like to count. Another pause. Ashway Prime was not the first time I stayed silent when I should not have. I am trying to build a record that is more useful from here. That is all any of us can do, Kale said. Yes, Vorn said. I am beginning to think so. The call ended. Kyle sat in the signal room for a while after. Not working, just sitting. The console was on minimal power now. The official distress frequencies were off. The deep space relays were on standby. The only thing still active was the quiet channel blinking its slow, steady blink in the lower left corner. He looked at it for a long time. Then he picked up his recorder. He pressed the button. He said, Day 24. The council vote passed. Sanctions against the human fleet that saved us. Formal procedure. All proper channels. He paused. 7 worlds abstain. 4 of them were in the document, the one with acceptable parameters. The other 3 found out from my testimony. They have requested the full historical record. He looked at the blinking light. These things move slowly. I am learning to sit with that. Not because I think slow is good, because I think the record matters. Because I think the 7 worlds in that document matter. Because I think Rice's recording entered formally and permanently into the proceedings of the body that voted before she could arrive. That matters too. He stopped. She built 20 years of infrastructure so that one signal from one world would not go unanswered. She spent those 20 years not knowing if it would ever matter. It mattered. He stopped again. I wish she had known. He pressed the button. The recorder stopped. He sat in the quiet for a moment longer. Then he powered down the signal room console the right way. System by system, in the order he had designed it to be powered down. Not because it was the fastest way, because it was the correct way. And some things deserve to be done correctly, even at the end. The last light on the console was the quiet channel indicator. He looked at it. Then he left it on. Because some signals should keep transmitting, just in case. 1 month after the Crayhorn withdrew from HFY Prime, Kale was in the garden. Oren's garden, technically. But Kale had been coming every morning since the relief convoy arrived. Partly to check on his father. Partly because the garden was simply itself. The climbing vine on the eastern fence was, as Oren had predicted, genuinely out of hand. He was working on it now from his usual position on the low bench under the fig tree, moving slowly. Not because he was hurt, because some tasks do not benefit from being rushed, and this was one of them. Kyle sat in the other chair. The twin suns were doing the morning thing. The light came in stages the way it always had. First the suggestion along the ridge, then the spreading warmth, then the moment. They sat with it for a while. She asked about you, Kale said. I know, Oren said. Tavek told you. He came by yesterday. We had tea. Oren pulled at a section of vine with the deliberate patience of a man who has learned that the vine will not be hurried. Sensible young man. Too serious, but that tends to correct itself with time. She wanted to know if you were all right. Oren was quiet for a moment. His hands kept working. Why do you think that was? Kale said. Oren looked up, not at Kale, at the sky, at the morning light doing its slow work across the upper atmosphere. Because she had been someone's signal once, he said, and she knew what it cost the person who holds the other end. He paused. She wanted to know if you had someone holding your end. Kyle looked at his father, 76 years old, hands that had held a manual contact panel for 10 hours through the night in a partially collapsed building, now pulling at a climbing vine in a garden on an ordinary morning. Except that it was not an ordinary morning. It would never quite be an ordinary morning again. But that was not Kale had been finding entirely a loss. There were things you saw differently after. Things that had been invisible before or taken for granted that now simply registered, not painfully, just clearly. The way things become clear when you have been close enough to losing them that you can no longer pretend they were guaranteed. I did, Kale said. I had someone. Oren looked at him sideways, the particular look of a man who is not going to make a fuss about something but wants it noted that he noticed. Yes, he said. You did. They sat. The light moved across the garden the way light moves when nothing is trying to stop it. Below them, through the gap in the garden wall, the market district was coming awake, the sounds of it drifting up the hill. Voices, carts on the stone pathways, the specific careful sound of silk glass being handled by people who know what it is worth and are not going to be careless with it. HFY Prime coming back. Not quickly, not all at once, the way it had always done things. With the particular patience of a civilization that had spent 2 centuries believing in something and had been badly hurt and was going to keep believing anyway. Perhaps more carefully than before, with a clear understanding of what it cost. and where the promises were that actually held, and which ones you had to build yourself in the dark over 20 years because the official ones had failed. Kyle picked up his recorder. He pressed the button. He said, "Final entry, day 31. HFY Prime is rebuilding. The gardens are returning. The silk glass is coming back. My father is arguing with a climbing vine and winning slowly." He paused. "The Compact Council has sanctioned the human fleet that saved us. 7 worlds abstained and have requested the full historical record. These things move slowly. I am learning to sit with slowly." He looked at the light on the garden wall, the way it came through the gap in the vine where Oren had been working. "I used to think the distress call was the hardest part, sending it out into the dark, not knowing if anyone would hear, not knowing if hearing would be enough." He stopped. "I understand now that is not the hardest part. The hardest part is deciding that it is worth sending, deciding that you are worth hearing, deciding that the signal matters even when every official channel has gone silent and every powerful voice has said otherwise." He paused. "It matters. I know that now in a way I did not know it before." He looked at his father working on the vine. "Commander Rice is gone. I did not know her long. 51 hours from her first signal to the start of the engagement. Perhaps 14 hours of actual conversation. A handful of exchanges that contained more honesty than most relationships I have maintained for years. She built 20 years of infrastructure so that one signal from one world would not go unanswered. She spent those 20 years not knowing if it would ever matter." He stopped. "It mattered." A long pause. "Lieutenant Tavek is still here. He says he will stay through the reconstruction. I believe him. He is the kind of person who means what he says. He is also apparently very good at drinking tea with elderly men who have strong opinions about climbing vines and the correct way to manage them." He stopped again, held the recorder, said the last thing quietly. "The way you say the things that have taken a long time to find their shape." Someone sent a distress call. Someone answered. My father held a panel in the dark for 10 hours because he did not want his son to reach for something and find nothing. And somewhere in a formal record that will not be removed, Rice's voice is still saying what she said. Still there. Still transmitting in a way. He looked at the sky. Some signals keep going. He pressed the button. The recorder stopped. Oren had looked up at some point during that. He had not interrupted. He had just listened the way he had always been, quietly extraordinary at listening in the way of people who have spent their lives at the other end of long distances, waiting for the signal that tells them what they need to know. He said, "The vine. I know. It is genuinely out of hand. I can see that. It will take 2 people to get it right." "Yes," Kale said. "It will." He stood up. He picked up the pruning tool leaning against the bench, and below them, in the market district of HFY Prime, the morning light caught the silk glass in the windows and held it the way it always had. The same light, the same glass, the same garden on the hill with the vine on the eastern fence and the fig tree and the low bench and the 2 chairs that had always been there. A different morning. But they were here to see it. And that, when you have spent 14 days not knowing whether you would be, is not a small thing. It is not a small thing at all.